Today's talk is about raw emotions, and this is something I feel that's really important. It's a big passion of mine. Of course, my degree's in psychology, and I do all of the emotional stuff with the yoga and emotional processing. But a lot of times when people try to adopt a new lifestyle or a new habit or clean up their nutrition, they overlook this piece. They're looking at the food, they're looking at calories or their exercise regime, without putting maybe enough attention on the whole emotional side. And I picked this picture because for a lot of people, especially in our culture, emotions are a little bit turbulent. It's something that is kind of dark and murky, something that a lot of people aren't really comfortable expressing or feeling. And so unless it's positive, if you're in a happy mood, that's all okay. But if you're having something that's tumultuous, something that, anger coming up or some depression or something, these are the emotions that we generally try to push, deeper under the water and not look at. And a lot of times they're not really socially acceptable to express. And so a lot of this can get repressed, and that's why it's sort of this hazy kind of murky thing. And then of course the element of water is associated with emotion. So emotion is a very, compared to earth or metal or fire, emotions are considered connected to the water element. This woman is basically accepting what she's feeling, what's going on. She's laying in the perfect Shavasana pose at the end of her journey, and she's just allowing whatever is there to be there. And that's really the key and the secret to the whole thing of learning how to master your emotions and how to process them effectively so that they move through the body and you allow them to move through and they're not staying stagnant and then affecting the rest of your life in a chronic way. When emotions aren't allowed to be processed or moved or really even felt, then they end up getting lodged in the body, and they can not only affect your social life, your relationships, your mental health, but also literally affect the physical body and create disease in the body. And you see she's got these friendly little helpers. So she's kind of accepting what's going on. And then seals are also known for playfulness. So if you can bring a little bit of lightheartedness into whatever you're feeling, and remember, it's temporary. No emotion stays forever. When you're in it and it's really strong, it's a very common tendency to feel like this is forever, it's going to be like this. But if you remember that everything is transitory, that allows you to actually feel it fully so it can move through. So having that kind of receptivity, that surrender, and that openness to feeling is one of the most important keys to making a successful transition in lifestyle. Because that transition will certainly trigger lots of emotions. And we'll get into how that works and how to address some of the different aspects as you move through this process. So the first thing is thinking about food issues. This is a common term that most people are familiar with. So think to yourself if you feel like you have food issues. A lot of times people, when they think about food issues, they think of something really extreme, like, oh, if you're bulimic, you have food issues. If you're anorexic, you have food issues. If you're obese, you have food issues. But in my experience, my personal experience, my experience working with clients, and then just observing people who are making transition in their nutrition and health, I actually feel that we all have some type of food issues. And a lot of times these aren't revealed until we try to make a change. So it's just kind of like coffee. If you drink coffee every day, you may not know if you're addicted or not addicted. But when you try to stop coffee, all of a sudden you find out. Is there an addiction there, or was it really easy? If it's difficult, all of a sudden that comes to the surface that there's, the addiction. Well, the same thing is true with issues around food. If we're just eating the same way all the time, we may not notice that there are certain attachments to foods, certain physiological addiction to foods, certain social pressures, all of these things tie in, and they show up when we try to make change. The roots of food issues, whether they're really extreme things, food addictions, or more subtle, like subtle guilt when you eat a bad food, or maybe hiding foods that you eat that you don't want your spouse or someone to know how many potato chips, just these little subtle things. Whether it's gross or subtle, the roots are both emotional and physiological. And so this is also why it's important to be aware of this when you're making a transition, because there are things you can do physiologically when you're transitioning your nutrition to actually clear addictive substances out of the digestive tract and to help balance the microbiome and things that are in your body that actually keep triggering those food addictions. So many times I'll hear people say, oh, I just can't get off sugar. I'm just so addicted to sugar. But what we find out is when you clean out the digestive tract, reset the microbiome, and get enough good, clean carbohydrates, the white sugar cravings can disappear, especially when you're getting enough minerals and nutrition and calories overall. So that's a physiological way that you can deal with a food issue that wasn't really an issue other than just getting balanced in your nutrition. The other side is emotional. A lot of us have emotional attachments to food. We have connections to food. Food is a very deep, deep subject. And the more that I've worked with clients, the more I've realized this, and of course in my own journey, it's probably one of the most challenging areas in our life to change, because it's every day, 2-3 times a day, 1 time a day if you're doing 1 meal a day. And it's very intimately connected to love, nurturing. For most people, their first connection with food was breastfeeding, if they were fortunate to get the best food as an infant, and that nurturance, and then of course food is survival. And so you find food is in pretty much every aspect of our life, every social event, every get together. It's something you have to deal with all the time. So it's a very big part of life, and it's a very deep part of life. It's very intimately tied into your emotional body. So when we try to change the food, we're not just changing on the physical plane, we're also changing on other dimensions, because we're multidimensional beings. So we have a physical body, but we also have an emotional body. We also have a mental body that has certain impressions, it has certain belief systems about this food is a good food or this food is a bad food. So all of that is tied in, and that's why it can be challenging. But if you address both the physiological side, like I said, doing some detoxification, making sure you're getting enough nutrition, really good quality, of course raw food nutrition, juicing, balancing the microbiome, that's the physiological approach to settle that side. And then on the emotional side, really the freedom comes from just recognizing that that's what's going on. So having that self-awareness, like, wow, every time, the birthday cake comes out, I get, I miss my mom. So you just recognize that that's happening. And then the second piece, it sounds almost too easy, but it's actually the most powerful way to transmute and move through those emotions, is just to accept. Yeah, I feel, when I see birthday cake, I feel sad because I miss my mom, or whatever the case may be. So the other piece of this is when you begin to change your food, again, tying into that mind, body, and also the body's tied in with the emotions, when we begin to change the food, that actually begins to change and affect our nervous system and our emotional body. So most people don't think about the way that foods affect their emotions, and how, we can watch this in children. If you give them a whole bunch of sugar, they'll shoot right up, right? You get really hyper and happy, and then they have the crash later, and they're crabby and crying and whiny. And unfortunately, if the parents aren't real conscious, they punish the children. But in a lot of ways, the children were actually taken on a drug trip, and they got shot up with the white sugar, and then they had the crash. Now they're having behavioral problems, emotional problems, which was tied into the food. So every food has a frequency and a vibration, and all foods affect us in different ways depending on not only the food, but how it was prepared, and who prepared it has a subtle effect on that food, and then the effect that it has in your body. So there's something known as nerve energy. We have a finite amount of nerve energy in our body. So that's limited, so they say. It depends on where you go with this, because in some ways everything is unlimited. But for this talk, we'll say, okay, science tells us that you have a finite amount of nerve energy in your body. Most of that is actually centered around the solar plexus. Go figure, right, where our stomach is. And so what happens is, if we eat a lot of heavy, dense food that's difficult to digest, and these are usually our comfort foods, things like macaroni and cheese, ice cream, things that are high in density, high in calories, high in fat, that requires a lot of nerve energy to digest that food. So if you're having a really strong emotional experience that's uncomfortable, and even positive emotions can be uncomfortable for some people. You just got a raise or promotion, you're really excited. They will instinctively and intuitively turn toward comfort foods because the body will prioritize digestion over feeling. So it will take nerve energy from feeling that really strong emotion and redirect it to digestion if you eat something that's difficult and heavy to digest. Simply because if you don't digest that food, you're going to have a lot of problems. It could make you really sick. Where the emotions in the short term, the body can set those aside. But then what happens is if we have a pattern and a habit of comfort eating, then the emotions never really get dealt with and they build up, and as I mentioned before, can create a lot of mental health issues and even physiological issues in terms of disease. So this is really key when we start moving into like cleansing, detoxing, and raw food nutrition. Because in general, raw and living foods are really high in nutrition, really high in energy, super high in hydration, fiber, all the good things. What they're not high in are things that are difficult to digest, except for nuts. If you're doing a whole, and you'll see this in raw food nutrition, if people are struggling with emotional eating, they'll like to gravitate more towards the nuts because, again, they get that density in the stomach, nerve energy goes towards digestion, and then they don't feel as much. So really those foods have a numbing effect on the body, and that's why we call them comfort foods. I actually call them discomfort foods because ultimately they lead to discomfort in the physical body in the short term, it's like, oh, I ate too much. But also in the emotional body long term because we didn't deal with the original issue, which was the feeling. And so that gets lodged down and creates even more discomfort on a chronic scale throughout our life. And it's not only discomfort, but it actually affects our relationships, our self-esteem, all of these things. It can affect our weight, etc. So when we lighten up the nutrition in terms of the difficulty to digest, then we free up nerve energy to feel. So anybody doing a water fast, a juice cleanse, or raw food nutrition that isn't super heavy in nuts or sprouted grains, things like that, they're going to free up a lot of nerve energy. Now this is a huge bonus because nerve energy can be used for a lot of things. In fact, that digestive energy that's freed up by eating the raw and living foods that are easier to digest, you can redirect that energy into athletics, into fitness, into your creative pursuits, in your work. And this is why when people do like a juice cleanse like we're doing or raw food nutrition, they have all this extra energy. And so it's great, and then you have more energy to feel. So in some ways, if people aren't prepared for that piece of it, it can be a challenge, and they may immediately go back to the heavier, denser cooked foods, not even knowing why, what's going on. So that's where the awareness piece is really important. It's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling more. Now I'm at a crossroads. What am I going to do? Am I going to go back to the breads and the, macaroni and cheese? Or am I going to take this opportunity in my life to really learn how to master my emotional body and to become familiar and comfortable with that? And that's really what we're doing in life, is we're learning how to be comfortable with all of these things. And emotions is a big part of our life. And they're temporary. They're there to teach us. They're there to show us things. And so once we learn to work with them, there's a massive amount of freedom in that because we no longer have fear of public speaking. We no longer sit around feeling guilty for something we did 20 years ago. Those chronic emotions which really weigh on us, when we clear those out, all of a sudden we also have another surplus of energy which can be directed into really deep connections with other people and, again, creative work, things that you can offer into society. So it really frees us up as a person on multiple levels. There's something known as molecules of emotion. There's a book written about it. Basically, every emotion you feel, there's a biochemical component. So we all know about stress and cortisol leads to gaining weight in the midsection. But every emotion, sadness, humiliation, anxiety, each has a very specific biochemical blueprint. What happens is when we're feeling, that biochemistry goes into the tissues, into the bloodstream. And you'll feel it. If somebody says something, like in a social situation that you get put on the spot, for example, whoop, there goes the stress, and you'll feel it. Maybe you get butterflies in your stomach or something like that. So when that floods the body, that's fine. That's natural. We're designed to do that. We're also designed to feel that emotion, to acknowledge it, and then the biochemistry balances back out. What happens is if we push that emotion aside. We don't want to feel it, don't want to look at it, and maybe just go eat the bread instead or something like that. That biochemistry doesn't fully go back to homeostasis, and it can get lodged in the tissues. So when we begin cleansing or detoxing the body, things start to get released back into the bloodstream, including the molecules of emotion. And that is why many times, for example, in a yoga class, when people are doing really deep hip opening postures, something in some part of the tissues can get released, and then you start feeling something out of the blue. It wasn't really out of the blue, it was an emotion that wasn't ever acknowledged or processed to begin with, and now it's coming up to hopefully be healed. And if you have that awareness, you can take the opportunity to just, like that woman, surrender. Okay, I feel really sad, or I'm really feeling a lot of rage coming up in my system. Great, that's part of being human. So when you surrender into that, it can actually move through and move out of the body, and you be free of it. Same thing in the digestive tract and in the liver. You know, all the organs, all the tissues can harbor these molecules of emotion. So as we're cleansing the body, most people are thinking we're doing a physical cleanse or physiological cleanse. You're also doing an emotional cleanse. So emotional processing, as I mentioned, my background is in psychology, and I went through kind of the whole gamut of, you know, psychoanalysis and the therapies, and a lot of talk therapy and this kind of stuff really has people in their heads. And what I have found is that the alternative therapies, especially the more body-focused and somatic therapies, are way more powerful for clearing these things. I mean, something can be cleared in one session. Whereas people you see on the, you know, the psychiatrist's couch are there for 20 years, right? And they're still telling the same story because they're in their mind and they're reliving that traumatic experience over and over and over again. And when they're reliving it by talking about it, they're releasing the same biochemistry, they're feeling the same trauma, and they're just feeding it, and it doesn't go anywhere. So when we move into things like yoga, meditation, music, pranayama, which is conscious breathing, dancing, art, you know, any of that kind of stuff that's not so analytical, more right brain things versus left brain things, you actually get the mind out of the way. You don't have to think about what it is. You don't have to keep retelling the story. You can just feel the emotion on the raw level of the emotion, the sensation. One term that's kind of common now is the felt sense or somatic sensing. So that's tuning into the body and just seeing, like, okay, what does fear actually feel like in my body? Without thinking about anything around it, it's like, okay, I'm getting a little bit of a knot in my stomach. Okay, acknowledge the knot and feel the knot. Or, oh, my heart's elevated. Okay, tap into the heart center. Just experiencing the sensations is emotional processing. It's very simple. It's not always easy because our tendency is to want to move away from experiencing that. That's why we've been doing the comfort eating and the pushing these things away. And so just allowing yourself to experience the feeling, you know, of that in the body is what processes it and lets it move away. And so that's what I was saying before, is that the best way to get rid of the emotional food issues is the acceptance piece. Acceptance is the key to the freedom. Another big piece of this is social graces. So as I mentioned before, food is in everything. You can't get together with a friend, have a birthday party, a wedding, a sporting event. You can't really do anything for most people. You know, of course we all are different, but for most people in common, you know, society, food, everything is surrounded or centered around the food. So this can be challenging if you're not prepared for that. You know, you haven't really figured out, what am I going to do about this whole social aspect? Because when you're in your home, if you live alone, or say, you know, you're with your family and they know your changes that you're making, it's pretty easy. But once you get out there, you're going to restaurants or different things, if you're not prepared, it can make it more challenging to stay on track, and it can bring up a whole host of social issues, interaction and relationship issues. So a big part of food and the social connection is belonging. So we're social creatures, and really belonging and being part of the tribe, part of the clan, was connected with our survival. So food and belonging are survival issues, which are root chakra issues. And so when we go into a new situation, there's this push-pull between, do I want to stick with my nutrition plan or do I want to fit in? And that's really up to each individual. It's a personal decision, you know, where that line is for you, but it's really good to figure that out, to know what am I willing to flex on? How important is it to me to fit in, and how important is it to me to be true to myself? And I have found in my own journey and people that I've worked with that this is a really powerful way to become really strong in yourself and strong and true to yourself. And it builds a lot of self-respect, and what ends up happening is people actually respect you more when you're true to yourself, as long as you do it in a respectful way to others. So food is and community getting together. Like I said, this is communion when we're having the social. And for most people, bonding and communion also means bringing food into the body. And then there's kind of an interesting thing, because there's only a few ways that we bring the outside world in. And when we think about communion or connection to other people, we think about closeness. So if someone has prepared food for you, in some ways what they're saying is, I want to come into you and be part of you and connect with you. So it gets really delicate, and this is why it's an area where people can be offended if you don't accept their food, or people can feel uncomfortable if you're not eating when they're eating, you know, because they also may have food issues that are being triggered by what you're doing. So being aware of all of that. The peer pressure and food pushers is, you know, very common. Most of us have somebody in our life that gets really upset if we're not eating the cookies and the this thing and that thing. And it's interesting, because I noticed probably 15 years or so ago that we, for the most part, only get pressured to eat foods that are unhealthy. So I go out to a restaurant with some girlfriends, and everyone orders a salad at the beginning of the meal but me. No one says anything. But when we get to the end of the meal and everyone orders dessert and I don't order dessert, all of a sudden all eyes are on me, and or alcohol, you know, it's like, why aren't you eating dessert? Why, you know, because subtly, subconsciously, they feel a little bit like they know it's not really the best, and they want everyone to participate, so it kind of eases the conscience in that way. So one thing you can do is, you know, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and just mention that when you're working with other people, one of the most important things, and this is something that I missed in the beginning, and it created, I think, more conflict and challenge for me than was necessary, is the communication piece. So first step is to know what's important to you. Where are your boundaries? You know, what are you going to focus on? And then the second piece is to communicate that with the people that you care about, the people in your life. You know, or coworkers, or whatever the case may be. And that can mean if you're being invited to something, letting the host know, you know, what your food preferences are. Offering to bring something is always, you know, welcomed. And letting people know that the way you eat is personal, and there's no judgment on the way they eat. And sometimes you would think, well, that doesn't have to be said, you know, it's obvious. But for people, I noticed this right away. A family friend of ours, I was in my 20s, and I kind of announced, oh, you know, I'm vegetarian now. He got very uncomfortable and started defending eating meat and all of these things. And I thought, well, you know, I mean, I was kind of taken off guard, but I realized just the fact that I was choosing something different was triggering some discomfort in him. And so it's helpful. And of course, every relationship's different. You have to feel it out, but it's helpful to kind of understand where other people are and find the best way to let them know that your relationship is about them, not what they eat, and that your choice is personal, and that there's no pressure on them or judgment, you know, if they, whatever they choose to eat or drink is, you know, you have that unconditional acceptance there. Planning ahead before you go out anywhere. So for restaurants, I normally look online, look at the menu. I'll call ahead to avoid that awkward time at the table where you're asking a bunch of questions like, what's in this, what's in that? So I just call ahead. Oh, can you make a salad like this or whatever? And then I will bring things, you know, if I go somewhere, like I said, bringing food to social events, even restaurants, sometimes I'll bring my own dressing, like I was telling you about, you know, my purse or something. So there's always ways to make it work if you plan ahead and just are prepared for that situation. Yeah, and then the last thing, just knowing your priorities and your boundaries really builds your personal power. That's probably, I think of the whole thing, you know, it's really good to stick to your plan, but for me, the most important thing is actually to stick to yourself. You know, be true to yourself and to stand in your own truth. And then to remember that people who really care about you, people we would really call friends, they're going to support whatever you want. Like, you know, whatever your highest choice for you is, they're going to be supportive. And so sometimes it can show you who your real friends are. So frequency, karma, and food vibes, or good vibes. So as I mentioned before, food is energetic. Every style of eating that we can think of, whether it's paleo, keto, standard American diet, vegetarian, vegan, raw vegan, fruitarian, breatharian, wherever you want to go on this whole spectrum, it's a huge spectrum of energy. And so because we're very energetic and the physical body is very receptive, as I was talking about earlier, different foods you eat are going to affect your mental and emotional body differently. It's also going to affect the way you feel to other people, which is an interesting thing. So the more you tap into this, the more sensitive you become, you will be able to begin to feel the difference in people's energy fields and how they eat. And you may have noticed that here, when we're in this environment and everyone is doing the juices, everyone's doing the Raw Living Spirulina, there's an energy field, there's a frequency to this, versus if we were at the steakhouse or at the bar or somewhere else, that's going to have a different energy. And so everything that we do, there's something I call frequency matching. So positive thoughts are in alignment and in frequency with positive food choices, positive lifestyle choices. Complaining, negativity, watching, horror films, this kind of stuff is going to have a different frequency, and it's going to align with different food choices. So sometimes we're trying to elevate the energy of our food choices, but we haven't elevated the energy of our environment. So there's a disconnect there, and we can feel that static. So if you know what's going on here, it's nice to relook at your environment, see how can I raise the vibration in my environment to match the vibration of my food choices. Plant-based eating is instinctual for humans. We could go on and on about what caveman ate, or this thing or that thing. But like Tim pointed out, the famous example of you put a baby in a crib with an apple and a bunny, which one's it going to play with? Which one's it going to eat? Most young children are not comfortable with seeing animals that have been killed. It's very upsetting emotionally to their nervous system. Most of us have been socialized out of that, and we're also very much distanced from what our food is. So it shows up in a little plastic package. We never really are honest with the whole journey of acquiring that food. I think if most people were participating in the whole thing of hunting and all that, most of them would probably choose vegetarian nutrition. Also, I noticed this several years ago. I was traveling and we stopped at a McDonald's to use the restroom. And I walked. Now, when you think about McDonald's, what do you think they serve? Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind that they serve at McDonald's?
The Big Mac.
Hamburgers, right? Like they're famous for hamburgers. So if it was instinctual for us to eat hamburgers and we were attracted to eating animals, then the most desirable or delicious thing that we would see on the walls of the dining room would be animals. That would, stimulate our appetite. If we saw a cow, if we were designed to eat cows, and we would start to salivate, that looks tasty. But in the dining room of McDonald's, they don't put any animals. All it was beautiful fruits and vegetables, which is what we're attracted to. So there's this disconnect because your appetite's stimulated from the beautiful colors and the instinctual, intuitive knowledge of what is your food, and then you go and you're served something that doesn't look anything like an animal at all, with lots of spices and things caked on it to make it tasty. So there's this disconnect. It's actually been found that humans are a frugivore species. They've studied the paleo poo, is what they call it. So this fossilized feces, and they found and discovered that humans are a frugivore species. There's a video done by Dr. Greger, and it's interesting because he does not promote a fruitarian or frugivore diet. He promotes plant-based, which is a little more accessible probably to the masses, but he does say we are actually physiologically a frugivore species. So that is a nutrition based on fruit. It's also interesting to note that ancient, for thousands of years, the yogic diet has always been fruit and milk. So, and we could get into issues in terms of the ethics of milk. And one thing to think about is whether or not we believe that humans are designed to drink the milk of another species. There is a really big difference between having a family cow and allowing the calf to get what it needs versus a factory farm that's using machines and hormones and many unethical practices. So, there's differences depending on where you get certain things if you want to go that route. Now, there's other physiological aspects to it too, but one thing I wanted to talk about is karma, because when people think about vegetarian diets, and they think about the morality side, and you get a lot of this in vegan activism. And if you in some ways, I think it's important for people to understand the message of the morality and the ethics piece. In some ways it can shut people down because we're very protective of our habits and behaviors. But when we talk about karma, karma is not morality. Basically what karma is the law of cause and effect. It's a fancy word that they use in the East, but it basically is just a simple law of cause and effect. So if there's a fire and you stick your hand in the fire, it will burn your hand. If there's this type of food, you eat this type of food, it's going to do this to your body. If there's this type of food, it's going to do something different. So it's about being educated about what the cause and effect is of different foods. And so that's why the term karma comes up a lot in yogic systems and in traditional Indian society, because they understood the law of cause and effect. And so one thing that goes a little bit deeper into this is the complexity of consciousness. So again, every food has a vibration, every food has a consciousness. As you move up from plants, or starting at Raw Living Spirulina, moving up through plants, birds, fish, animals, up into four-legged animals, deer, elk, and so on, the consciousness gets more complex. And so going back when we were talking about molecules of emotion and these types of things, there's actually two aspects to this. One is the complexity of the nervous system and consciousness of the animal, which affects its biochemistry and affects when that has an effect on you. So it actually adds more static and complexity to your own system. Another piece is also that when animals are slaughtered, they release a whole bunch of chemicals into their system, a whole bunch of death chemicals, so adrenaline, these types of things. So then when we eat those foods, that affects our own nervous system. So it's very well known in Indian society that you would give meat to the warriors. But if you were doing spiritual practices and meditation, they wanted the fruit and the milk. So it's much more sattvic, it's much more in alignment with peace and harmony and spiritual receptivity, where the animal foods were more associated with rajasic, which is aggression, war, and fighting. Now, in many views, people feel there's a time and place for everything. My hope is that we come to a society where no one feels that they need to have that level of aggression and activity to go to war, necessitating that type of food. There's also a principle in yogic philosophy, ahimsa, which is non-harm, non-violence, really doing the best you can with the least destruction. And this goes way beyond animal welfare. This talks about environmental welfare and how much water are we using, what's the effect on the environment. And the lightest footprint, obviously, is raw and living food nutrition. You're getting the maximum nutrition with the least amount of damage and harm. And many plants, you're not actually killing the plant. Fruit is a perfect example. So you're just accepting, and a lot of times fruit trees, they'll, if you spend enough time underneath the fruit tree, it'll throw it in your lap. So it wants you to eat the fruit and spread the seeds, and it's all part of the symbiotic, very beneficial relationship. And so, doing the best we can with the least harm to the environment and to other beings, and of course, least harm to ourselves. So earlier I was talking about frequency matching. This is something I discovered. So I have spent a good amount of time coaching myself and also coaching women in nutrition, especially women that want to lose weight, be healthy, retain their beauty, longevity. And I found, so I was talking about, raising the vibration of your diet without thinking about your environment. You can have some static there. If you're trying to be raw vegan in a sports bar, it's going to be more challenging than in a farm-to-table vegan restaurant, right? Because that environment supports it. There's an energy there. So I noticed that I used to be really, really addicted to white sugar. Had to eat it every day, had health problems because of it, asthma, I was on medications for 20 years, about 40 pounds overweight, and all of that disappeared when I started eating enough fruit. It's just a simple fix. And of course I took out the white sugar and I took out the dairy, and asthma went away, no medications. It's really easy. So what I noticed is that if I was eating my raw food nutrition, sticking to salads, really high vibration food, then if I felt like I wanted something sweet, I would automatically gravitate towards fruit. In fact, if after eating a salad, I looked at ice cream or something like that, it was a turn off. It's very nauseating. But if I started getting off of the raw foods and getting more into cooked foods, and usually it's a slippery slope, you kind of just do some, sweet potatoes and then some quinoa, and you start getting into maybe some processed foods, and it can go down quickly. I would notice after like a cooked vegan meal, then I didn't really want fruit. I wanted something a little more, especially if there's a lot of salts and spices and flavorings in that cooked food meal, I was wanting something. So if you think of it like a spectrum, if you're having pizza, after the pizza, you're going to want candy. You're going to want something really, kind of match that intensity. But as you move into center with salads, then your sweet craving is going to move into center with fruit. And we have sweet cravings for a reason, is to get that, but we want to get that carbohydrate requirement fulfilled in the most nutritious way possible, which is fruit. Our savory craving is a craving for minerals, which we find in the vegetables, especially leafy greens. Your environment has a huge effect on your mind, your nervous system, your emotions, and your food choices. So many people will say if they live with another raw vegan, or if they're doing a juice cleanse at a place like this where the environment supports it, it's really easy. But if they go back home and their husband wants them to cook steak and the kids are eating Cheetos, and, hopefully not, but, then it's a lot harder to maintain that level of vibration. Same thing with your thoughts. And so I always encourage people to surround themselves with really beautiful images of produce. Put your fruit out where it can be seen. Ideally have a garden where you spend time in that environment. Getting connected with the food and the beauty of high vibrational nutrition helps to keep you there, keep you in that. Whereas I don't recommend, things like watching the Food Network and cooking shows, things where, it's not foods you want to be thinking about, because where your mind goes, your attention goes, energy flows, and that's where your life flows. Okay, another piece is sensitivity. Many people on Raw Living Food Nutrition talk about this. It's something you have to experience to understand. I think some people can feel it intuitively, but people who are maybe not real sensitive, they think it's just kind of woo-woo, you're making it up. But then when they go through a juice cleanse, they say, whoa, kind of like the experience we had in the woods yesterday going on the hike. So when you begin to lighten up the nutrition, as I mentioned, you have more nerve energy. Well, the nervous system is where we feel and experience higher states of consciousness. It's all connected into the brain chemistry, the different glands, and the nervous system. So when people have an out-of-body experience, when people go into deep meditation, when people have something that they would consider transcendental or a mystical experience, it involves the nervous system. So the cleaner that our nervous system is, and the higher and freer the energy moves to the nervous system, the more open we are to those higher states of consciousness and more transcendental experiences. Big part of doing this is removing obstruction, removing things that don't fully digest in the human body, like animal products, that create metabolic waste and metabolic obstruction. Undigested proteins, undigested fats that are circulating and clogging the system. So removing the obstruction, getting a really good level of hydration. The best hydration is going to come from your fruits and vegetables. If you're eating a dehydrating diet, which is cooked foods, salt, spices, alcohol, those kinds of things, you really can't drink enough water to get that perfect hydration. So it's, part of really optimal hydration is removing the things that are dehydrating and then getting the best level of hydration, like the fresh juices that we're having here. So that hydration, which is the water piece, very conductive, and then the minerals, especially in greens and in the vegetables. The water and the minerals is going to help heighten and amplify and streamline the magnetism of your nervous system, which is going to make you open to these higher states. It's also going to make you more sensitive. And so this goes back to the raw emotions, and the more you feel, the more sensitive you are. And some people, most people actually they're not comfortable with that level of sensitivity, and that's why they go back to the comfort eating. That's why they might regress back into old eating habits. But again, if you can learn to master the emotional piece, it's sort of like you're standing on one side of the river, and the river is mastering your emotions, and the other side is transcendental bliss states of consciousness. So first, we have to wade through the emotional piece to get to that side. And anyone, even if they're not changing their nutrition at all, just beginning a meditation practice, a yoga practice, they have to go through that layer. So if we, with the tips that I gave before, if we accept that and we go into the emotions, feel the emotions, and like that woman, let them be how they are and realize and recognize they'll move through, we can cross that river. And once we get comfortable with that level and master our emotions, now we're free and open to experiencing higher and higher states. And this is where we get things like picking up on other people's emotions, feeling their emotions, being very intuitive, being very empathetic, and a lot of compassion comes up when we're more sensitive. People who are compassionate are sensitive people, they can feel. So, more compassion, and then also picking up on other people's thoughts. This has been proven now, it's not a woo-woo thing. Having extrasensory perceptions is being sensitive. So thoughts are a sine wave, and they actually leave they're not in here because they can be measured outside the body with instrumentation. Well, they don't just go this far, they actually travel out. So the more sensitive you are, the more you can pick up on it. And that's where you get synchronicities too. Things start just aligning, you're thinking about somebody, they call on the phone, and it begins to feel magical when you get into those states of consciousness and get your life into a flow state. So all of this is possible when we move the frequency of our nutrition up, as long as we're willing and we're aware of that piece where we have to go through the river of mastering our emotions. So the last little piece here is just having a wellness success mindset. Super helpful. First thing, being really clear. We talked about this before. It's like, what is your goal? What are you doing? Because a lot of times I'll talk with women, they say, well, I'm going to eat healthier. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because we need to be able to check in to see if we're doing it or not doing it. For me, in the beginning, when I first began to clean up my nutrition, there were certain things that were just, there was a line in the sand. I knew I was not going to eat animal flesh at all. It's like, never again. Overnight, I made that change, never went back. There were other things that were kind of a gray area for me, like sugar. I know it wasn't ideal, but I would, make exceptions. So I was really clear in where are my boundaries here? What am I going to do? What am I not going to do? And also, like I mentioned before, taking into consideration, what am I willing to be flexible on in social situations? So for me personally, and this has been a journey of really gaining in my own personal strength and self-confidence and self-respect, was it doesn't matter who the person is, what kind of tantrum they throw, what kind of pushback, I will not eat animals. Doesn't matter. It's just no deal. But if I'm in certain situations with my mother, for example, she eats a lot of raw food. Good for her. She's doing really well. But she doesn't eat 100% raw food. And when I'm with her and I cook for her, I eat with her. So that may mean I'm eating quinoa, and I'm fine with that. I don't have any problem with being flexible there. So I know where am I going to be flexible, where am I going to really stick to my plan. As I mentioned before, really where you keep your attention. So this is surrounding yourself in a community like this, surrounding yourself with people who are on that same wavelength, on that same vibration, living the same lifestyle. And the more that you do that, that's going to build your own energy and momentum and your success. Surround yourself with successful people, you'll be successful in any field. Really strong impact that our environment and especially the people around us have on us. As best as possible, set up your environment, so making sure the fridge is full of good healthy foods. If you're traveling, calling, knowing where the good health food stores or good restaurants are. And then the beauty piece, having beauty, anytime I travel, I love getting a bunch of fruit and just even if I'm not going to eat it all, I just put it all on the counter, and every time I walk in the room, I feel lifted up just by looking at it. And then, this has happened to me many times recently. I get up in the morning and I just look at the bananas on our counter and I think, ooh, I want a banana right now. It's just, you really start connecting with those foods and the beauty. So that environmental piece is really important, and watching your headspace. So a lot of our thoughts are repetitive, and many of them are unconscious or subconscious. So starting to check into what are the stories I'm telling myself, what are the thoughts I have, like, oh, I can't live without this, or oh, I got, whatever the case may be. And then even just not thinking about certain foods. So if I tell you don't think about a pink elephant, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? You see this image of this pink elephant. So rather than not thinking about pasta or not thinking about cookies or whatever, think about the beautiful, living, fresh, vibrant foods. And there's so many ways to do that. You can connect in with communities, through social media, different podcasts, things to keep your mind in that space. Then if you keep your head there, that's where your behavior is going to go. Conscious eating is really, really powerful. I feel like this is one of the most powerful steps in making permanent change. It's really easy to do a short-term cleanse or something like that, but if you're wanting to make permanent lifestyle changes, one of the best things is conscious eating, because what that does is it starts to really tell you what you really love. Because a lot of so-called unhealthy eating is unconscious. So again, we had a bad day at work, we're feeling all the stress, we just come home, we just tune out, turn on the TV, give me something, open a bag, and there it goes. We're not aware of what we're doing. If we turn off the TV and we sit down with whatever we choose and just look at it for a moment, and then we might notice, oh, I'm really stressed out, right? Because we gave that space all of a sudden to even check in with what's going on in there. And then if you decide you still want to eat that food, enjoy it, every little last bit of it, because that's going to actually help the nutrition assimilate better, and you're going to enjoy it more and not just check out. Because a big part of eating is physiological, but also another big part is pleasure and psychological. So if you're unconscious eating while you're driving, at a business meeting, which is probably one of the worst eating scenarios, or watching TV or scrolling through your phone, you miss most of the pleasure. You miss most of the psychological. And so then you may have filled the belly, but some part of you didn't get filled because you weren't eating consciously. So it works in your favor in many ways. It works in your favor in satisfaction. It also works in your favor because over the last 15 years, many times I've gone back to old favorites. And every time I do, there's two things that play here. One is the cleaner your body gets, the more you feel foods that are at a lower frequency. They don't feel very good. The other is your taste buds change. Your taste buds begin to clear and get more in alignment with health and nutrition. They get healthier. And so foods that I thought I loved so much, that goes back to the emotional attachment, the emotional piece, I actually don't love at all. And so if you're being conscious and aware, oh, I love M&Ms. So then you go and have some and you think, these don't taste like, I used to think these taste really good. They don't taste very good. And then 30 minutes later, you're like, I feel terrible. You're tuned in and you're paying attention. And that is one of the most powerful things to keep you on track, is if you're listening and aware of how different foods feel in your body. Because there's no question that, aside from maybe a little bit of detox, that people feel significantly better on Raw Living Food nutrition. So you hear it over and over. The only reason that people go back is if they have a very specific condition or some kind of a challenge, like they can't get access to really good ripe fruit or something like that, or that river of emotion is just really deep and it's scary and it's difficult and they need some time to master that piece of it to where then they can sustain it. Staying connected to a wellness community. I mentioned before, inspirational content in your news feed, getting support, especially if you really want to do this. I recommend working with someone who's been there, walked the path, who knows the ups and downs. And it's like I when I'm talking to people, it's kind of like you go to Machu Picchu, or you go somewhere in Peru or the Andes Mountains, and I want to go up to the top of the mountain. Well, you can go alone, or you can get like a little reference book, or you can go with a native who's lived there for 30 years. They know every bush, they know what's edible, what's poisonous, they know the poisonous snakes, they know what clothes you need, and they're going to walk with you, so when you run into something difficult that you didn't expect, they know how to get over that hump. And so, yes, staying connected and having that support. Staying positive. Raw Living Foods is in the same vibration as positivity, love, compassion, enthusiasm, creativity. So the more you keep your vibration in that state, the more you're naturally going to gravitate towards those foods. If you feel yourself, like the person that always calls, it just, every time you hang up, you feel bad, worse because they just complain for an hour and you listen to it. Now maybe shortening those phone calls, being conscious of the things that are affecting your own vibration so that you can keep yourself really positive. Of course, exercise, fulfilling work, fulfilling relationships, that's going to also help you to be able to eat, the higher frequency foods. And then the very last piece is acceptance. It's a journey. Most people don't go 100% raw overnight and stay 100% raw. A lot of people have different, and it's different. It's, we're all unique, so it's different for everyone. So just accepting where you are is really powerful, because first of all, it helps you to stay more positive when you accept. But also, if we start beating yourself up and I can't believe I fell off the wagon, that creates that frequency of a downward spiral, which then leads into more, less optimal choices. So if you get a little off track, or you go somewhere, whatever, just having that acceptance and letting go and moving forward is the fastest way to just stay on the right track, to stay successful. And then the last little piece is to love yourself healthy. A lot of times people fight against health, but that flow really comes is when you care enough about yourself to make the extra effort, takes the extra steps, stand in your truth, respect yourself enough and love yourself enough. That energy field is going to bring you into optimal wellness much faster than anything else. Any questions?
Nice.
That's it.
Good.
I like
So
that
true
river of
about-
emotions.
A lot of my clients' problems are they need to clean out the old stuff, and
Right.
they need to deal with the emotional,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so helpful to them that you're aware of that, because a lot of people, they focus predominantly on the physical body, because again, we can see it, it's kind of easy and tangible, but the emotional part, especially if we haven't done that work, it's a lot more difficult to handle. Somebody comes into your clinic and they're just like, ah! It's like, whoa, okay, you really have to have mastered that to a certain degree in yourself in order to be able to offer that support to that person. And I think one of the biggest things is just creating an open space for that to happen, because I've found this so many times in my own experience. I grew up in a society that's not really comfortable with emotions, and I learned very quickly that when I was in certain moods, that wasn't okay with other people. They were like, if I was angry, other people around me were very uncomfortable, and it's understandable. Anger is not the most fun emotion, but if we're okay with anger, now somebody can blow up and really lose their head and just go berserk, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
sure. And it doesn't really bother me. It's not my favorite feeling. I would rather feel something positive, but it's okay. Let them, you can have that tantrum, that's okay. And so the fact that it's okay with me gives them full permission to do it. And they really need to do that. It's like it's like a bowel movement. How long are you going to hold that in?
Right.
So it stinks, but just let it out, right? And then it's out. And then and it'll short. Here's the interesting thing too. It's really powerful. That tantrum or whatever, explosion or expression is shortened radically if you are okay with it, if you accept it. So, if a boss comes in your office and, he's like, ah! If you sink down into your body, get really still, and accept and be okay, he's having a total meltdown, and he's accusing me. Okay. And your acceptance of that, pretty quick, he'll snap out of it.
Yeah.
And he'll be like, okay, well, maybe, and what that means is he processed it. And you helped him do that by holding space.
Right.
And so he's free, and you got relieved of not having. But if you're fighting it, and you're like, oh, I don't want to feel this, and you're getting all awkward, your energy is going to just actually keep that going, because it doesn't give him permission to move it through.
Do you have it recorded anywhere, or do you ever give this? My sister would benefit from hearing this.
Yeah, so I did today. I recorded it, and so I'll probably put it on YouTube, and I just send you the
great.
link. Yeah, if if all goes well. Technology is sometimes issues like. But
I'm gonna check just one thing on
I'm sure you could turn it off.
this. Let's see.